Hello and welcome to Delta College Impact. I'm Roger Waller, your host for today's program. And on today's show, we're going to talk about a personal issue for many families, and that's dealing with grief. And on the first half of the program, we're going to be joined by Paris Brown, who's a nurse with the local hospice organization here in San Joaquin County. And Paris and I are going to talk a little bit about the wonderful services that hospice provides to many families who are faced with a very personal issue. And Paris, welcome to Delta College Impact.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. And I know a lot of people are familiar with hospice, but maybe you might give the audience a general idea of what hospice is all about.
Hospice is an organization that's nonprofit, and we help families at the end of life illnesses. It's not just a cancer illness, but any terminal illness that threatens the end of their life. And we come in and assist the families, provide care in the home to help maintain that loved one at home in the comfort and care of their loved ones.
And I know that's really one of the key things when you think about it, is that many people, face the traumas in a hospital. But the key with hospice is that it allows the family to return to a home and be much more in the comfort of their own home. And I guess that's one of the basic principles of hospice?
Yes, one of the basic things that we do is help to manage the symptoms. A lot of times when the family or the patient is close to the end, they're in and out of the hospital. Usually treatment has ceased and there's nothing else but comfort care, and that's where hospice comes in, is to help the family maintain the comfort of that patient at home.
And I know that you're a nurse, and so you have that professional training, but that the hospice program really involves a team effort. You might want to talk a little bit about that team effort.
Well, we work with a team. We have the nurse, registered nurses, we have a dietitian, we have the chaplain, we have the social worker, and we have a bereavement worker. We also have volunteers that work with hospice. And with this, we provide a team effect to the care of not just the patient, but to the entire family.
And one of the things that here at Delta College that we've been very involved with hospice for a number of years, because it's a nonprofit organization, so one of the challenges is always raising funds. And every Christmas there is a tree that is put up during the holiday season. And let's talk a little bit about that hospice tree at the holidays.
During the Christmas season, we know that it's a giving season, and as well as hospice being a nonprofit organization, we rely heavily upon our community for donations. And at Christmas time, people are usually thrilled, not just with giving to others, but giving to hospice. We do the Tree of Lights here at Delta College, but we also do a Tree of Lights as a fundraiser in Lodi and in the Manteca area to serve our patients there. And it's not just for fundraisings, but it's for a memorial to our families that we have served during that year.
And I know one of the big challenges that families face is really making that decision, when you suddenly realize that there is no more treatment that can really assist an individual. And as you work with people, and I know hospice isn't just you, but it's a number of other people, what should a family do, and how do they actually start to approach that decision?
Once they realize that there is a terminal illness, they should start investigating hospice services and when it would be right for them. A lot of times families wait until the very end, and we could really benefit them in the beginning of the illness. So they should call us and let us get familiar with them, and we can start our care with them early on during that illness rather than waiting till the last few days. They could benefit from the services of hospice early on in their diagnosis.
And I know the real question is that hospice not only deals with older individuals, but it really runs the gamut of dealing with people who are facing that terminal illness.
Not just the older generation, but we have babies. We have children, young toddlers, school age. It goes from 0 to 100. So we cover every age aspect.
And one of the things I guess that a lot of us really would think about is and we're going to have the phone number for hospice at the end of this segment, but also you can look it up in the phone book, for that time when you have to deal with that issue. And when that issue does come up, and I call hospice, and and I say, you know, I'd like to learn more about your services, would I come down to your office, or would you come to our home, or how would the situation
We
be?
have families come to the office. We have a small private conference room that they can meet with any staff member, social worker or nurse, or our director, and discuss what hospice has to offer and how it could benefit that family. We also have literature that if they don't want to come into the office, we will mail it out to them that discuss our program and the things that are available to them.
Now, what would be some of the services that you would provide in a home for a family?
We provide the symptom management care for the patient. That would include everything that's going to help that patient be comfortable and be able to maintain home status. We provide spiritual support. We provide the social worker that will help connect the families to resources in the community, as well as support the family in their decision and in the difficulty of caring for a family member at home. We provide a dietitian. A lot of times during that end stage, patients are not eating, and families become distressed because we're a society that believe if you don't eat, you won't get better, and that's not always the case with our hospice patients. Eating is not a priority sometimes. So we have a dietitian that will help discuss those things and things that they can do as a family member to help that patient eat and be comfortable. We have home health aides that also help with the personal care of that patient. For some family members providing care, they can do a lot of the support and care, but they just can't do that personal care, and the home health aide comes in with great help for that.
And I know that one of the issues that we have is with the people working, and you know, a lot of times you have both, you know, either both parents or both relatives working. How do you work with that sort of challenge?
Unfortunately, we don't have the resources or the staffing to provide shifts of care, but we do work with family members and connecting them with the community resources to help with the 24 hours care if they need that. We support the family also with respite. That can be anywhere from 4 hours on once a week to a 5-day respite to give the family some relief. It's very difficult when family members have to work. Financially for them, it's a necessity that they need to work, and then they need to be able to provide the care for the loved one at home. So we connect them with resources in the community that can sometimes help them with that.
And one of the things that we want to do is to give you a little bit of an idea of the Dealing with Grief conferences that we have here at Delta College and some other support services. And so we're going to be going to a brief tape to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the issues being faced at this conference.
Living with Grief, Hospice Foundation of America's annual live via satellite teleconference, providing educational opportunities and practical assistance to individuals, families, and professionals, while supporting and strengthening communities. The Hospice Foundation of America presents Living with Grief, the 4th annual, 5th annual, 6th annual bereavement teleconference. Your moderator, Cokie Roberts.
Each year, this program generates a great deal of interest, and this year we have over 150,000 people in more than 2,500 communities across the United States and Canada.
How can we break the news to the spouse without losing each person spiritually and mentally?
As always, we're honored to have a distinguished panel of clinicians, researchers, and teachers from the field of grief and bereavement.
While we often focus on death-related losses, in fact, there are lots of losses we can have in our lives which engender grief.
Do we feel a different rage at a natural disaster from a man-made disaster?
You can learn from listening And the important thing is to be able to hear.
How can one best talk to a young child who isn't able to think abstractly?
The concept of the wounded healer is a good one here, because it is through my pain that I'm able to connect with you.
Carrie, you have written about anticipatory grief.
Yes, Koki, and anticipatory grief is often a much misunderstood concept.
The technology has affected us, as Betty mentioned, both ways. It cuts good and it cuts bad.
It's not a question of whether children are going to have deaf education. The question is whether there's going to be good deaf education or not.
All of that makes me particularly interested in what you're learning today about bereavement, about what we know about children who are as honest as my father in facing death and as bewildered as I once was in the aftermath.
How do I help my pre-adolescent son who's caught in this culture?
Let's hear what some kids have to say about returning to school after the death of a loved one.
To go back to school, I felt nervous. I didn't even want to go back. No, not knowing that when I come home from school, I wouldn't see my mother.
Is there a problem going in the other direction in terms of, again, people of a certain class feeling that it's inappropriate to grieve?
Sudden death is personal, of course, but ripples of grief reach out to family, friends, neighborhoods, and an entire community, a whole country, and they last. That is why your work is so important.
We begin with a clip from the popular television drama ER.
And he was brought here by ambulance in full arrest. And we tried to resuscitate him for 31 minutes. We used all of our capabilities, but his injuries were too severe, and he died.
Well, Pat, that is a scene that you have seen many times in your life. How do you think this doctor handled it?
What Carter did right, I think, is he used the word died. He looked the family in the eye. It was clear he was identifying with this young man.
Are there experiences here that can help the survivor later?
Talk about goals and the person's functioning, and what do you feel most able to deal with at this particular point in time?
Whenever we assign the it shouldn't be's, if you will, that is where we run into most of our difficulties.
My question is to anyone on the panel, is there an inappropriate way to grieve?
And I'd also like to thank you, our audience, both here in the studio and around the country, for participating in this important program whose subject touches all of us. Good day.
You've seen a brief idea of what goes on in some of the various conferences that talk about hospice and dealing with grief. And I know, Paris, as we've talked about it, there are a couple of other issues that you wanted to mention.
There's
the one where you're talking about the relationship with the family after the...
Right, the bereavement after the death of a loved one. We had so many things to talk about, and I kind of trying to remember which one was on my mind at the time. Usually after the death, we still follow our families. We follow our children as well. Up to a year after the death of a loved one, we have a support group for families to come out and participate in, and it's age-oriented for the children from any age so that they can relate to the death process and get back into normal society and school and dealing with their life after death.
And I know that that's really one of the challenges that many families will be facing. And if you are one of those families now, or if you know somebody who could use the assistance of hospice, feel free to contact them here in Stockton. Their address is 2609 East Hammer Lane here in Stockton, zip code 95210, or give them a call at area code 209-957-3888. Hospice is a wonderful organization, a nonprofit organization, and an organization that's here to serve all of us. So we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about dealing with grief. Paris Brown, thank you very much for joining us. And you stay tuned as we talk more about the process of dealing with grief.
The Stockton Emergency Food Bank has been serving our community for 2 decades and delivers over 100,000 meals a year to those in need. Because we realize our donors' time is important, we'll be happy to pick up your grocery donations at your doorstep. Just give us a call at 209-464-7369. Hope to hear from you soon.
Welcome back to Delta College Impact. I'm Roger Waller, your host for today's program. And on today's show, we've been talking about dealing with grief. And on the first half of the program, Paris Brown from the local hospice organization talked about their wonderful caregiving activities. And on the second half of the show, I'm joined by 2 Delta College counselors, Dan Flores and Rocky Lajeunesse. And they have been dealing with this issue themselves, involved in a local Delta College conference that has been put together for a number of years. And Dan, I'm going to begin with you because I know you've been very instrumental in having this conference here at Delta College. And briefly, let's just talk about our relationship with this program.
Well, it spans quite a few years. Part of it was triggered off by my own grief of the loss of my father, where I was able to bring this teleconference with, in conjunction with Hospice of San Joaquin County. And really the whole idea of grief in the workplace, anticipated grief, but mostly the role of caregivers, begin to realize that the role that Delta really needs to do for more death education, to provide support for families, students, staff, mostly in having individuals feel that when they get in the role of as a caregiver in the care of parents and family, that they're not alone, that there are a significant amount of resources around them, and that isolation doesn't necessarily have to be. And hopefully we're a conduit to our own staff and to the people that come into our own personal lives. And I guess the first question would be is, who is a caregiver? And over the years, I've been able to find some very good material. There's a woman out of Beth McLeod that gave what I felt, or I feel, is a very good definition of who are caregivers. Quote, "My parents left a double-edged legacy, awareness of both the sorrow and the generosity of the human heart. Nowhere, perhaps, is this paradox more widely played out than on the daily stage of family caregiving, where the unsuspecting can find themselves on a chaotic journey in which the only certainty is the demise of their loved one." And we all don't know at what point or what stage our family or parents will in fact die. And so there's all different significant levels. These caregivers, she continues, quote, "are a path seemingly without end, subjected to the stresses and the guilt of watching and others' pain without being able to erase it, of witnessing a loved one's dying without being able to prevent it. They quietly sacrifice personal agendas to look after those in need, often sandwiched between child care and jobs and usually without advanced planning. They live a world apart from everyday reality and wonder if they will ever be normal again. They have one goal: to maintain the dignity and the well-being of their loved one until the end." Now, those individuals, and all of us included, really need assistance. We don't need to do this alone. It's a real learning process. And I think that if someone out there in the audience feels that they're going through this or they have gone through this, there are opportunities to share. There's opportunity to learn from anything that goes in our life and everything that goes in our life. And I guess that's the real message, that we're all caregivers. Some of us sooner than later. And then perhaps there's other things that we can discuss about the whole caregiving role.
And I know, Rocky, one of the challenges that Delta faces is a lot of times our students are facing with this challenge of dealing with a loss or dealing with a long illness. And I know you've been involved in working with some of our students, and we can provide a certain amount of support, but there are also other professional caregivers out there who can provide assistance. How do you deal with that student and work with them to continue their goal of an education, but also deal with that family challenge?
Well, I think that's where working with the other staff at school here, we work real closely with the registrar's office, and of course they've been real good in the past in working with students who've had problems along these lines here on campus. But beyond that, I think it's important that we provide resources to students. When somebody's faced with something like that, it can be, the term that came to mind when Dan was reading out of that article was chaotic. It can be overwhelming. And I think the important message to convey to the student is that you're not alone, you're not the first person to have gone through this, and there are resources available. And I think it's important that we as counselors are familiar with those resources and are capable of referring these students, should they need that, off campus as well as on campus.
But I think the educational part is one's ability to be able to recognize when one's in grief. That anger is a form of grief. Somebody withdrawing is a form of grief. And everyone grieves distinctly and differently. The person that has a child murdered will grieve very differently, very angrily, versus somebody that has anticipated the death, and yet when it happens, the manifestation is still there. And so that's part of what our message today is that caregiving is really starts at the educational process. The earlier we talk about it, somehow we're supposed to automatically get 3 days or 5 days of grief, y se acabó, and that's it. Well, some people don't even get into the grief process long before, when the body allows them to function, allow them to do whatever needs to be completed in terms of the disposition of the body, the funeral, etc. And it's long term, so well, why are you all upset or what's happening on? So that's part of recognizing what grief is and what stages and how it manifests itself, and usually also how severe it is, when it really then you do need professional help. But support groups are what hospice does. They don't necessarily get into therapy. Theirs is to provide other individuals that have had similar experiences, whether it be loss of children, etc., and they can go from there.
Now, when you've had the conference here at Delta, I know you bring together a number of professional caregivers, and what is their background and what sort of organizations do they represent?
We've had clergy, although really the clergy in the element of death, as more and more people have less religious or church connections, are really are in less number. Less people turn to clergy in their time of someone's death. There are social workers, there's early childhood educators, really the whole caregiving community, whether they be working with children or adults or aging in particular, they come and are part of the conference, and they're trying to gain a sense of how to help. And realistically, for many of them, they're looking answers for themselves. I look for ways in terms of how to cope with the loss of family, my parents, etc. And there are answers out there. The pain may be the same, but at least you're not alone, and that what is sort of kind of acceptable, or not acceptable is not the right word. It's hard to describe because it's so individualistic for every individual.
There's no formula.
No, there is no.
And I know one of the things, Rocky, as we talk about, a lot of times we've been discussing sort of a terminal illness, but the issue is that a lot of times illnesses that are very chaotic for a family can go on for years. And how does that impact that sort of challenge for an individual to cope?
Oh, obviously it can be a life-altering experience. The grief process, I think we typically associate that with the loss of somebody, but loss can take many forms. It's not necessarily just the death of somebody. It could be somebody who's sustaining from some long-term illness, Alzheimer's, things along that lines, and you're having a significant change. You're losing somebody. You're losing the person that you once knew. for example, and dealing with a new person that's more demanding. You're becoming, if it's your parents, you're becoming the parent of your parents, and it has significant implications for your life, for your family, for your job. It just crosses all boundaries. Financial considerations come to the forefront. So when I look at that, I think the more resources that are available and that people are aware of, and we're not just talking about counseling or health care, but it could be a broad spectrum. It could be dealing with financial issues. The more resources that are there, the greater awareness there is of those things, the better off somebody's going to be when they have to eventually deal with something like that.
And I know, Dan, we talked about hospice on the first half of the program, but there are other organizations that people can look to. And say here, using Delta College as an example, where would you say an employee or a student who suddenly faces that trauma, how should they deal with it?
Well, if they want more education, we do offer a course on psychology of dying. We do have some initial courses that deal with, in our marriage and family class, a very large component that our marriage and family instructors have taught. Certainly the counselors are there to help provide the support, help them to referral points in the community. It's just a matter of asking for help and not feeling the isolation, but reaching out for assistance. Recently, when one of our staff persons had a significant altering life experience with both parents, they solicited help through our email system. And we were incredibly surprised, but happily, that other faculty and other staff had similar experiences, and they provided incredible resources to assist that particular staff member on campus in that we don't know everything. We're all learning about this process. Several people have advocated that we really should do very much like what we had with Peace Corps, with AmeriCorps, but now we really have more of a focus of almost this is going to be overwhelming for 85 million yuppies, of which I'm a part of, the baby boom generation, as we lose our parents and our significant families.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting discussion for us on today's program as we talk about an issue that's going to be challenging to all of us. If you do have some questions or thoughts about how maybe Delta College can provide some assistance to you or some ideas and guidance, you can contact our guidance and counseling department here at Delta College. Their phone number is area code 209-954-5652. Dan, Rocky, thank you very much. We've discussed a challenge that we're all going to be facing, and we hope that you found this program interesting and useful, and if you are dealing with this issue, we hope we've given you some ideas on how to deal with those challenges. Thanks for watching Impact, and we hope to see you at a future program. Bye-bye.